She borrowed beauty from a spirit and they came to collect. What would you trade for perfect beauty? It sounds like a question from an old fairy tale, doesn't it? A story about a deal with a demon or a tricky genie. We tell ourselves we're too smart to fall for something like that now. We know that nothing really comes for free. But what about the older things? The wilder spirits that live in the deep parts of the woods. The ones that don't play by our rules, whose promises are as sharp and as binding as a piece of broken glass. Today, I'm telling you the story of a young woman who thought she could outsmart them. She walked into a forest she was told never to enter and asked for a gift. And she got it. Oh, she absolutely got it. But she was about to learn a terrifying lesson. A debt to the spirit world always gets collected. In a small village, right on the edge of a huge, unsettlingly quiet forest. This wasn't a forest where kids played or lovers carved their initials into trees. This was the kind of forest that seemed to swallow sound, where the trees were a little too close, and you'd swear the shadows moved when your back was turned. The village elders called it the Grove of Whispers, and they had one simple rule: stay out. They'd talk about the ancient spirits inside, nameless things that guarded their home with a bitter jealousy. In this village lived a young woman named Elara. And, well, there's just no nice way to put it, Elara was plain. In a village that buzzed with life, she felt dull and faded. She wasn't mean, or stupid, or cruel. She was just overlooked. While other girls caught the eyes of handsome suitors, Elara felt like she was made of glass, someone people looked right through, but never really at. She carried this loneliness with a quiet sadness, hiding how much it hurt to be invisible. But when she was alone, looking at her simple, forgettable reflection in the stream, a bitterness started to grow in her heart. That feeling was always worse during festivals, when the village exploded with color and dancing, and she was left on the sidelines, watching a party she couldn't join. One night, during the Harvest Moon Festival, that feeling became unbearable. The most handsome man in the village, Sorellen, was choosing a dance partner. One by one, radiant young women were presented to him. Elara watched from the shadows, that old, familiar knot twisting in her gut. Sorellen's eyes swept over the crowd, and they passed right over her without even a flicker. In that one moment, in the sharp sting of being completely and utterly unseen, that bitter seed in her heart finally sprouted. Suddenly, the elders' warnings about the forest didn't sound like a threat anymore. They sounded like an answer. Later that night, long after the last bonfire had burned down to embers, Elara snuck out of her house. The moon was a sharp sliver in the sky, and it cast long, skeletal shadows as she walked to the edge of the Grove of Whispers. The air turned heavy and still. The usual sound of crickets just stopped. Every part of her was screaming to go home, but the fresh memory of Sorellen's blank stare pushed her on. She took one step past the tree line, and it was like walking into another world. The air grew cold, thick with the smell of damp soil and something else, something ancient and metallic, like old blood or buried coins. She walked until she found a clearing with a small, perfectly round pond in the middle. The water was as black and still as glass, reflecting the sky like a perfect mirror. Feeling pulled by some force, Elara knelt at the edge. She looked at her reflection, and the plain face looking back at her felt like a joke. A single, hot tear of pure frustration fell from her eye and hit the water. But there was no ripple. The water just swallowed it. And then, a voice. Or, not one voice. It was a chorus of whispers that came from the water, the trees, the very air itself. It was genderless and ancient, and it sounded like it knew everything. "Why does such sorrow bring you to our woods, little thing?" the whispers hissed. Elara, shaking, found her voice. "I want to be seen," she whispered, the words feeling tiny and pathetic in the huge silence. "I want to be beautiful." The whispers circled around her, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. It felt like she was being judged by 1,000 unseen eyes. "We can grant this," the voices finally said. "A face that will make the world stop and stare. A beauty that will burn hotter than any flame." Elara's heart pounded. This was her chance. "What's the price?" she asked, her voice barely there. The whispers twisted into a sound that was almost amused. "You may take our beauty," they sang. "But beauty that is borrowed must, one day, be returned." In her desperation, the warning didn't even register. "Returned? You mean it will fade when I get old?" she asked, assuming it was just a riddle about aging. "It must be returned," the voices repeated, and said nothing more. "I accept," Elara said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. The second she spoke, the black water swirled. A shimmering, ice-cold mist rose up and wrapped around her. It felt like 1,000 tiny needles on her skin, a cold that went right to her bones. It was agony, but it was over in a flash. When the mist cleared, she looked in the pond again. The face that stared back was not her own. It was breathtaking. "Okay, quick pause. If you're getting chills, do me a favor and hit the like button. It really helps the channel out and lets me know you want more dark stories like this one. And definitely subscribe, because you are not going to want to miss what happens next." When Elara walked into the village the next morning, it was like the world had been repainted in color. The first person to see her was an old woman who literally dropped her basket of bread, her mouth hanging open. In minutes, a crowd had formed. The whispers that followed her now weren't about spirits, they were about her. Her beauty was everything the spirits had promised, and more. It wasn't just that she was pretty. She had an aura, a glow that pulled every single person in and wouldn't let them look away. Her once dull hair now had streaks of gold in it. Her grey eyes were now the deep, moody blue of a stormy sea. And Sorellen, the man whose rejection had started it all, practically tripped over his own feet trying to get her attention. Her entire life changed overnight. She was no longer invisible. She was the sun that the entire village revolved around. She was showered with gifts, love letters, and compliments. The memory of the pact she'd made in the forest felt like a strange dream. That warning about returning the beauty. It seemed like a silly little riddle. Of course beauty fades with age. She thought she'd just been given a head start. She thought she had one. She threw herself into her new life and the power it gave her. She loved ignoring the people who had once ignored her. The quiet, plain girl was gone, and in her place was a queen who was growing more and more cruel by the day. But as the seasons changed, little things started to go wrong. At first, they were small enough to ignore. She started feeling a constant chill, a cold deep inside her that no fire could warm. She noticed that flowers would sometimes droop and wilt if she stood too close. Then, the animals started acting strangely. Dogs would back away from her, whining, and birds would fly off in a panic if she came near. Then, it got worse. Her own reflection started to turn on her. Sometimes, in a window or a polished pot, her reflection would move a split second after she did. Other times, for just a heartbeat, she'd see a flash of something else in her eyes, something ancient and dark and hungry. Soon after that, the whispers started again. They were faint at first, just a hiss on the wind that almost sounded like her name. Elara. But they got louder, clearer, until she could recognize the many-layered voice of the forest spirits. They only said one thing, a chilling reminder: the debt grows. Real panic started to sink in. She tried to drown it out with silks and jewels and the fawning attention of her admirers. She held on to her beauty like a shield. But the shield was starting to crack. One night, while getting ready for a feast in her honor, she ran a hand through her gorgeous hair, and a single lock turned bone-white, crumbling into dust between her fingers. The cold inside her became almost unbearable, and the whispers weren't on the wind anymore. They were inside her head. Beauty borrowed, must be returned. The night of the feast marked 1 year to the day since she'd made the pact. Elara put on her most beautiful gown, her face painted to hide the sickly paleness that was starting to creep through her magical glow. She had to believe she was still in control. She forced a smile and walked into the great hall, where the whole village was waiting for her. She danced with Sorellen, the music loud and joyful. But with every turn, the ice in her veins got thicker, more painful. The hall, which had been so warm and bright, seemed to be getting darker. The happy faces of the villagers started to look like twisted, leering masks. A sudden, crippling wave of weakness hit her, and she stumbled. Soellen caught her. "Are you all right, my love?" he asked, but his voice sounded far away and distorted. She looked down at her hand on his arm. For one horrific second, she didn't see her hand. She saw a withered, skeletal claw with long, yellow nails and skin as thin and dry as old paper. She screamed, a raw, animal sound that sliced through the music and brought the entire hall to a dead silence. Every eye was on her. She scrambled backward, her hands flying to her face. She could feel it happening. Her glorious, borrowed beauty was peeling away from her like melting wax. She ran to a huge, polished silver platter on a table, desperate to see her reflection. The face that stared back was a living nightmare. It was her own, but aged 100 years. Sunken, hollow eyes stared out from a face that was a roadmap of deep, cracked wrinkles. Her lips were thin and colorless, pulled back from her teeth in pure horror. And the whispers were deafening now, a triumphant roar inside her skull. "We have come to collect." In front of everyone, she collapsed. The light that always seemed to shine from her was sucked away into nothing. Her shimmering hair faded to a lifeless gray. Her perfect skin became sickly and mottled. The spirits weren't taking her with them. They were doing something much, much crueler. They were taking back their gift, piece by agonizing piece, and they were taking her own youth, her own life force, as interest. When it was over, the thing on the floor wasn't the beautiful Elara, and it wasn't the plain Elara. It was a withered, broken husk, a ghost in a living body. Elara didn't die. The spirits left her behind as a permanent warning. She became a hermit, a shadow haunting the edge of the village, a scary story for children made terrifyingly real. Her tale became the new warning about the Grove of Whispers, far more effective than any of the vague stories that came before it. They say on quiet nights, you can still hear her crying, a sound that makes your blood run cold. Her story is a brutal reminder of a theme you see in legends all over the world. In Scotland, they tell tales of the Bean Nye, a spirit who washes the bloody clothes of those about to die. In Germany and other parts of Europe, spectral white ladies are said to appear in castles as an omen of tragedy or death for a noble family. All these stories share the same warning. Dealing with the spirit world is a transaction, and the price is almost never what you think it is. Elara asked for beauty, and in their ancient, cruel wisdom, the spirits gave it to her, just long enough for her to build her entire life on it, before they ripped it all away and left her with less than nothing. It makes you think, doesn't it? What hidden prices are attached to the things we want most? And if a spirit slid out of the shadows and offered you the one thing you've always wanted, would you be strong enough to say no? I'm genuinely curious, what would you have done in Elara's shoes? Let me know down in the comments. And if you want to explore more dark legends and forgotten folklore, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Thanks for watching.